Although the heat of late summer lingered in the air, the hours of this particular night seemed as long as those of midwinter. Earlier that day he had risen before dawn as usual, before Cornelia had awakened. "I walked to the Mise. The air was chilly. The seasons are changing." John spoke softly. He did not want to disturb Peter again. He described to Zoe, or perhaps to himself, how he had continued across the expanse of the Augustean, all but deserted at that hour except for scavenging seabirds and the occasional heap of rags marking a sleeping beggar, past the great church whose dome glowed faintly from within against the lightening sky, and through the forum of the Law Basilica where the sellers and copiers of books clustered their shops. Laggard carts rattled toward the city gates. He was up with the dogs. The gaunt beasts loped through the long shadows, nosed whatever refuse they could find in gutters and corners. When the sun had risen and carts were forbidden, the dogs could safely lie on the warm cobbles in the middle of the streets. The cries of gulls, muted by distance, accentuated the emptiness. Mist rose from the pavements as if from a grey sea. He could smell the sea. His morning walks were longer since Cornelia had come to stay. He had never imagined they could be reunited, and had grown used to his solitude. He was ever aware of her presence in his house. He turned aside into the area known as the Copper Market. In the early morning light, lavender plumes of smoke from unseen furnaces rose above low brick buildings. From doorways and alleys there came acrid smells, unidentifiable to one who worked in ceremony and diplomacy rather than metal or glass. During the past few weeks he had extended his morning walk to an unnamed square no different than scores of others in the city. Grates were still pulled down in front of its shops. A Christian holy man kept his endless vigil from a broad platform atop a pillar at one end of the open space. The stylite stood motionless, gazing over flat rooftops in the direction of Mithra's rising sun. There was no one to observe the man except for John and the gulls and the stray dogs. After a while, a hooded acolyte emerged from the doorway in the base of the column and left the square, giving only a passing glance to the tall, thin man waiting nearby. No doubt it was not unusual for pilgrims to take up vigils near the pillar. When the square was empty again, John looked up toward the starlight, but movement drew his gaze back to earth. His years as a mercenary were far in the past, but he retained the keen alertness of a guard on watch at the border of the empire. A figure emerged from a doorway among the shops, not the acolyte. The figure moved in John's direction. It was no accident, John realized. Although the Lord Chamberlain's plain indigo cloak, by its cut and fabric, marked him as a man who should not be on the street without a bodyguard, he had never been attacked. There was something in his bearing which convinced predators to wait for easier prey. Or maybe, as his young friend Anatolius warned, it was only that Fortuna had smiled on him up until now, or else he had been spared by his old servant's god, as Peter insisted. He knew he did not have Mithra to thank, because Mithra was not the sort of deity who looked out for those who wouldn't look out for themselves. His short blade was in his hand by the time he saw that the attacker was merely a woman. A street whore, or so he thought, until she drew near enough for him to make out the shabby but once elegant robes and the purple shadow of the veil obscuring her face. She spoke in a breathless, hasty whisper. "Come here tomorrow, at the same hour. I have information. There's no time now." She had looked around as if panic-stricken and turned to leave. John lifted the cup again, not as far as his lips. The lamp on the desk guttered and went out. He could still see the mosaic girl. Her eyes glittered in the dim light from the window. "Normally, I wouldn't have taken the encounter seriously, Zoe," he told her. "It was obviously some sort of mistake or a trick. But as she turned, I asked the woman who she was. She paused and pushed her veil aside just for an instant, long enough for me to confirm that what she said was the truth." "Don't you recognize me, Lord Chamberlain?"